Welcome to Brain Balance Live. I'm Jen. I'm a fellow Brain Balance mom. And this, of course, is Heather. Heather, how are you doing this week?
Couldn't be better if I tried. How are you?
You know what? I'm hanging in there with the best of them. So this week we're going to be talking about something that actually I have experienced myself with my child. And so I'm so excited that Heather is going to be talking about this topic. And just for anybody who's joining our show, Heather is a cognitive specialist, a behavioral cognitive specialist. She's a therapist. She's been the National Autism Summit speaker. So just a wealth of knowledge. And she is here. This is her passion to let us pick her brain about all the things that make us tick, right? And today we're going to be talking about what, Heather?
We're going to be talking about difficulty with handwriting. At first, I was thinking of doing handwritten expression, but it's such a broad topic. I think this needs to be a two-parter.
Love it.
And so whether you have a child, I don't think we're quite there yet, but whether you have a child who has a diagnosis or not, dysgraphia actually is not. Hi, Debbie. Good to see you. Look, she has all these cool hats. She's my fellow hat friend.
Amazing. I love it.
She's a styling lady. So sweet. But yeah, dysgraphia used to be a diagnosis in the diagnostic manual, and it isn't anymore. A lot of people still use it, but really it doesn't explain anything other than difficulty with the active fine motor task in handwriting. So with or without the diagnosis is irrelevant as far as addressing this. It's still a real struggle. But you said, what kind of challenge have you seen with this with your kids?
Well, we've talked in other shows kind of, and you probably know like technical terms with this, but what I remember of it is that when a child's brain is just overwhelmed with too many things, that some things start to slip through the cracks. And so I've seen my son have handwriting that is brilliant. And I've seen him have handwriting that looks like a completely different person. It's chicken scratch. I can barely read it. It looks like he was half asleep when he wrote it. Right. And it was you who opened my eyes to the fact that his brain is probably overwhelmed with too much information whenever he's writing in that way that I can't read. So I'm just excited to hear you dive into that.
Yeah. And one thing is, and that's a great lead in to what I wanted to say, is that is common. And that does not mean that my child cared about this assignment and not this. This is not laziness. This is not my child's just sloppy in a way that doesn't care. The work looks sloppy, but they can't help it. There may have been different demands in one assignment than there were in others. We all have a certain cognitive capacity. This is how much I can deal with and process at a time. And if handwriting is not automatic, so if your kid's writing looks good sometimes and not others, their handwriting is not automatic, or else it would be consistent. Not to mention the layers of other things being difficult. But the harder the active handwriting is, the more the needle moves up on how much I can take in. Now I only have this much space left to give neat handwriting, or sometimes the handwriting itself looks fine, but you know they're so smart, you know how much they know about this topic, and then you get back an assignment, you're like, that does not at all reveal what they know. They were unable to get their thoughts translated onto paper. We know that handwriting automaticity, it's automatic, it's like breathing, it's like experienced drivers, is highly predictive of the quality and the quantity of content written, as well as really deep reading skills years down the road. So the active writing and language and fine motor and gross motor, all kinds of sensory skills all play together here, and it must be automatic. When it is not consistent, something in there is not automatic. It is rarely, if ever, a choice. Who wants to churn through that and then be called lazy and get in trouble for it? You know?
Exactly.
That's fun. So all right, I think we'll move on to that slide. And this is not even an all-inclusive list, but look at just some of the things going into handwriting. Fine motor coordination. Think about when we talk about the sensorimotor system and whether it's working or not, we have accuracy issues. Can they do this thing? Whether it's with auditory, good foot sounds like good. That's an accuracy issue. Can they carry out the accuracy of forming a letter? Modulation, which doesn't really play in with fine motor, but I'm taking in too much or too little information. And sensory motor planning. just, we learned this first in our gross motor system. So if your kids miss developmental milestones, or if they got the big ones that everybody thinks about, but then there's something stuck, maybe they're missing that the gross motor coordination using both sides of my body in complementary but opposing ways comes before my ability to stabilize my paper with one hand while I write with the other. And look what's happening. I'm crossing the midline of my body to write left to right across the page. I've seen so many students where when they give me a writing sample, the lower it goes in the page, the left margin angles. They can't go all the way to, they're having trouble crossing the midline and can't go all the way to the left. If they have trouble sizing, spacing their letters, if it floats instead of being anchored on the line, writing in the margins. But you need attention. It requires a ton of working memory because you have to remember how to spell, how to form the letters, how to space them. Is this a capital or not a capital? Writing is one of the most demanding things we do. It requires a lot of different kinds of memory and spatial understanding. So if your kids have body awareness issues or equilibrium issues, I don't know where I am in space, so I don't get the concept of how to space these things. And also body awareness, which you usually hear talked about in the context of reading nonverbal communication. And there's a lot more layers to it than that. But on this topic today, I need to have tactile and proprioceptive awareness. So I know how to grasp the pencil or the crayon or marker, how hard to press down on the paper without breaking it or slipping through my fingers. How frustrating. I put on a bracelet today that I put on a million times. I was having trouble for some reason, and it was frustrating. And then I laughed at myself because I was in a hurry, and that's my fault, right? But I'm laughing at myself. I don't have to wear that bracelet. Big deal. And I'm thinking about what about these people with these students, and this happens in adults too, who have to struggle through every single aspect of tying their shoes and doing this fastener and doing these projects at work or at school. What I was experiencing, I think that was just like a meant to be thing as a reminder of how frustrating it is when you have these challenges, because it impacts you all day, every day.
Yeah.
Your eyes and your hands have to work together. Hand-eye coordination is not just for gross motor, it's for fine motor. Organized physical movements, receptive language. Of course, that goes into the language aspect of written expression, because you need receptive and expressive language. We've talked about memory, concentration with awareness, spatial, organization. All of these things have to work at the same time. Integration. You have to have your memory and your attention and your fine motor and your gross motor and your sensory, all of those things working as a well-oiled machine. They're in the same tempo. Out of sync means not automated. Churn, churn, churn.
Yeah.
So, all right.
It's why it feels like when we work on so many of these other things that seem unrelated, doing the brain balance program, a lot of them you can't necessarily tie it to handwriting, but I noticed those things get better as a lot of our issues were getting better. Just things like, changing our tactics and doing things a little differently at home. His handwriting has gotten better over time, and we haven't really worked on handwriting.
Yes. Every single one of these things we're talking about directly ties to handwriting. And I know that it is, to your point, that's not intuitive if you don't have this background, how all of these things go together. But that's why we must look, where are the cracks in the development, and go all the way back to the foundation and rebuild from the ground up. You cannot build a house on a foundation that has cracks in it. You're going to have issues with the windows and the walls and things cracking and the roof not being structurally sound. It has to start with the foundation. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. So we're going to start with some easy stuff, and then we're going to get into some activities. So today we're talking more about the act of writing, and then we need to get into trouble with written expression next week. But you can see how the act of writing eats up all their reserves, and now I can't even think about what I want to say. So your kids may not have an actual written language expression issue. If this is an issue, that's taken all the fuel in the tank, and they don't have anything left to give their thoughts into paper. But next week, we're going to talk about when it is the language component. But if they are having troubles holding pencils, if they break crayons every time they hold them, or they have an awkward grip, or they slip through their fingers, pencil grips help develop a functional grip. They give some tactile cues to position things correctly. You may have to experiment with a number of them to find the one that's right.
Yeah, these are fancy.
I know these are, but you can see the writing cloth. These have little cups where your fingers go through them. They kind of like force the fingers in the right position.
Yeah.
A pencil grip is cushioning. It has 3 sides. So some kids who are very tactily sensitive, you know, someone you touch and they're like, ow, or they're very particular about touch, that gets the hardness of the pencil away, but it also gives them a place to rest their fingers. Yeah. Crossover grip adds a thumb blocker. And so some kids will wrap their thumb around wrong and that won't allow it to. And then there's this owl guides 4 fingers. You can see there's a loop and a ring. You can go to Amazon and find a bunch of these, but look at your child's pencil grip. What are they doing with their thumb? Maybe you need the thumb one. Are there 4 fingers that don't know what they're doing? You can see, kind of look at their grip and match it. Another thing that is so underutilized and it's so easy is, and it's not parents' fault, you have no way of knowing this, but I wish these were used more in schools, is a slant board. You can see how it puts it at an angle. That takes away visual fatigue, visual strain. It helps support the forearm, the wrist, and the finger. So if they have weak muscles, trouble with muscle tone, and yes, they can be an athlete and still have issues with these muscles. But it takes away some of the strain from the motoric aspect of it, as well as eye strain, so that they don't get so exhausted doing this. They may come home from school in a better mood if they start using these. But just try pencils of different thicknesses, find what's comfortable. You can also just use, even for crayons, what are the holding strips? Show where the stripes are on there and relate that to where their fingers go. That might be enough. Or you can add tape to pencils to guide. But these are like professional where you don't have to, but there are ways to kind of configure it at home just with some tape or some verbal cues, using something as a guideline for where their fingers go.
I never knew about the holding stripes.
See? That's the first thing you've learned on here.
No, it's not, but it is definitely one of them.
All right, let's move on. Now, yes, you need to practice letter formation. They need to trace and do mazes and cut things and all of the things you hear about all the time. There are kid tweezers, there are games where they can pick up things with tweezers and put them building with puzzles, anything where they're using or planting seeds. But yes, they need to practice letter formation. Sometimes the sheets that are used to practice, where they have the dashed lines that are supposed to show you lowercase and uppercase. Yeah. That's a lot of visual fray for kids with visual perception issues. If your kids are having handwriting issues or reading issues, visual perception, there is a very strong chance that is at play. And it is important to know that almost 25% of our brain's function goes to visual perception and processing. But what are some other ways? Let's get away from school, homework, blah, copying letters. Yes, it's important. Yes. But if they have issues with dexterity, strength, yes, you need strength in your fingers and your wrist and your forearm. Just think of things outside the box. Crazy Aaron's thinking putty. These are just examples, but it's really cool. Even teens like this one, and you can pop it and squeeze it and stretch it and pull it and do all these things. It's sort of like a silly petty thing for older kids, although younger kids like it too. But as you do that, it changes colors. So there's a visually appealing aspect to it. You can be creative but anyway, pop beads. There are sets you can get on Amazon where you pop these different things together and create bracelets and necklaces. This is great for a party or just girl time, mom and dad playing with the kids. And then you're not done with that. You can separate them and create a different creation next time.
Yeah.
But they're having to use strength to pop them together. They're also getting to be creative and express themselves. Of course, stress balls or squishy balls, but there are a lot of them that will even do cool things like this. It's not just where you squeeze and release where it gets smaller, bigger. There are some that have mesh around them. So as they squeeze, little bubbles come out of the mesh.
Yeah.
Things that make it more engaging and for kids to be more likely, where it's strength training for the fingers.
Yeah.
Think about this. You may not see this in pre-K, kindergarten, first grade. The assignments are short. Write letters, write words, write sentences. As the assignments get longer, these kids may be task avoidant. because they are physically tired from the act of handwriting. And often they won't say that. Some kids will say, my hand is cramping, my arm hurts, or you might see them doing this. And it can look like an avoidance tactic. Yeah, right, whatever. Like they're trying to get out of it.
My finger would hurt. I got calluses on my middle finger on my right hand from how much we had to write in school. I remember how much it hurt.
Yes. And the longer the assignments get, the more taxing it is. Longer reading, longer writing, visual perception, fine motor things come into play much, much more. I had to show this Connect 4 because outdoors is so good. And they now have like life-size, outdoor-size Connect 4.
Amazing.
And the reason I recommend Connect 4 or tic-tac-toe is that often individuals with dysgraphia, or even though that's not an official thing anymore, have issues with diagonals. And so they can learn about diagonals in a really fun way, but they're also getting the fine motor and the gross motor. And I like this one because notice up here, it's not just about fine motor. Handwriting is not just about fine motor. You need postural stability, core, arm, and shoulder strength. Think about that. If I have trouble, if your kids are leaning over like this doing their schoolwork, that puts more strain on the shoulder and the upper arm to get the writing done. And kids often do that because their visual perception is not there. So if your kids are doing that, think visual perception. But you must be able, you want to engage your core. And when I am upright, it's less taxing on this part of my arm to do the writing, really the whole arm. It gets you in the right position. A lot of kids, that is not a given. Even kids who are on football teams. We test their core strength because there's a difference between lifting weights and muscle tone at rest. That is not the same thing. But you must have the right core because it impacts how hard it is on the rest of your body. It impacts your visual perception. So whether you're doing Pilates or actual resistance training, focus on these strengths, not just what looks cool, when I flex for my friends. So chores around the house, mowing, pushing, pulling, lifting, dusting, all of those things, you're growing body awareness. You're also teaching responsibility, but you're getting some of the motor skills that are needed. But with this Connect 4, especially depending on how tall they are, you're also using your upper arm to put the pieces in there, and you're getting outdoors. Nature is so important, but you're learning diagonals. Diagonals are often difficult for those with dysgraphia. Also, multi-sensory, using paint or writing in sand with your finger or with a stick. He's still having to grasp the stick to do it. Squigs, these are cool. You can stack them. They stick together and you can put them up. This can be for bath time. They can stick against the bathtub or against a window in their room, and they can create different designs with them. But as far as the posture, there are also this is actually a wedge that this girl is sitting on. It has soft little spikes on it. They're soft, but that gives you a tactile input, and the angle of it is teaching her the right core, the right posture.
I just want to sit up straighter, even just looking at
it. Look how straight she's sitting up.
Yes.
And sometimes kids, I've shown you before something that's just like this, except it swivels. Sometimes keep in mind that movement does not mean kids aren't focused. Sometimes movement enhances focus. So maybe they need to stand to do their work. Maybe you need to if you put paper, tape it to an easel or up on a wall. Sometimes that takes some of the motor deficits away so they can get their work done. Sometimes take turns you write down notes for them as they're reading, and then they write some notes. Just so that the taxing nature of if they have these deficits doesn't get in the way of them being able to show what they know. One of the hardest things is when they're thought to just not being applying themselves, or they're lazy, or they just don't care, and they do. What happens if you partner with them or have them, record their thoughts into a tape recorder and then write them so they got their thoughts, and then they do the act of writing separately? There's so many different workarounds. Keyboarding. Writing is an important skill, and all these fine motor tasks are important. But there are apps, can they use text to write if they have just real deficits? But there are still ways to grow these skills and make them better.
Awesome.
All right, let's move on. Have I mentioned that this is tied to visual perception? I'm saying this because it is overlooked. You think handwriting and you think fine motor. It is also gross motor. It is also a bunch of executive function abilities. It is also visual perception. But here are some tips. Follow the 20-20-20 rule. I was just going to say these, but then I decided to do a slide in case anyone wanted to take a screenshot. Every 20 minutes, look at something 20 feet away for 20 seconds to rest and refocus the eyes. That is important. So, and some of our kids have difficulty. They lose information from far to mid to near, which is something we're doing all day long. Chalkboard, desk. And my book is propped up here, and I'm doing it here. This is also working on a thing called convergence. That's very good for them. Use blue light blockers on screens and eyeglasses. Corey, I think, has blue light blockers on his new glasses. He told me.
Yes, we're fans.
Last year. Yeah. Blue light interferes with melatonin production. Melatonin is a neuroprotective chemical that helps us sleep. Maybe it is blue light. One of the factors for those kids out there having difficulty going to sleep, staying asleep, restless sleep. There are a lot of things that do that, but there are built-in nighttime settings, or here's an app I listed for you to darken the screen in the evening. Color filters for sensitive to harsh and white light or who experience contrast sensitivity, in which dark letters on a white background are hard to read or appear distorted. Understand, some kids are the opposite. If there is a light blue background and then there's blue ink on it, those might be too similar and they have trouble distinguishing them. But stark differences are hard for others. Play around and see what makes it better. Most computers have colored filters in the options, and it's built into the iPhone. And here is an app for Android users. Fluorescent lights, not a fan of these. I know they are cheap and serve a purpose, but if you have kids with sensory processing disorder, and P.S., if they are having trouble with fine motor, it's quite likely that there's some sort of sensory processing issue going on, whether it is visual or not. If you have kids who are sensitive to sounds, they do make buzzing and clicking sounds that can be really distracting. But also the lighting can be harsh, but that sound will decrease focus. Keep light sources at eye level to reduce glare. Work areas free of clutter. I know I've mentioned this on previous shows. Kids need some blank space. It needs to be clutter-free. Cluttered environment, cluttered mind. And on top of that, if I get overwhelmed with, it's just like for kids who cover their ears for auditory or who make comments about sounds, like how loud something is, and everybody else is like, what? Same thing. Kids might break eye contact or just get distracted because there's so much visual clutter. Neat, orderly, only the necessities in the study space. And most importantly, these are Band-Aids. It is very, very, very important to take care of visual perception and processing issues, because almost 25% of our brain's function goes to visual perception and processing. It is one of the most overlooked struggles, but it is not enough almost ever, if ever, to do just visual perception therapy, because visual perception must have equilibrium in place. There are primitive reflexes that get in the way. There are many different things that combine, and just doing eye exercises usually isn't enough. If your kids are having 6 different struggles and you work on one of them, now this one is stronger. These are still down here. This one can't operate by itself, so it comes back to join them. It's important to address all root causes of the struggles they're having. Okay.
They all tie in together. The more you talk about this, the more I see that everything just ties in together.
They do. I mean, the knee bone is connected to it's like it's like, think about any task we do. If you really try to break it down, what are all the skills you use to do this blah, blah, blah at work? What are all the skills you use to cook? When you start thinking about all the planning and organization and math and attention and memory, because you do this one by memory, and the sensory motor stuff and the smell and the taste, when you think of any task you do in life, how many skills are you calling upon to do it? And so these kids almost always, I don't know if I've ever worked with a kid in my entire career where it boiled down to one thing. It might look like one thing, but when you do a deep dive, it's a combination of things not going right. And they churn, run out of steam. It comes out emotionally, behaviorally. Sometimes they make the grade. That's the tricky part. Sometimes kids manage to make the grade, so then it's like, oh, when they apply themselves, they can do it. But man, they can act nasty at home. Or is it that they are working way too hard to do it, and it has to come out of another bucket? You can only compensate for so long.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it all connects together.
It's so, so true. Heather, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today about this very relatable topic. As you can see, these are all of the ways that you can follow Heather. She is always aware of our comments. Whenever you instant message on here, she will see that. DM her with questions, and please go in, get an assessment at any one of these locations. You will not regret it. Heather, anything you want to close with today?
No, I just want to, this does apply to adults too. There are accommodations you're entitled to at jobs. If y'all have any questions about any of that, please feel free to reach out. But I will be back with Dr. Brian Thursday at 3:35.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Heather. I'll see you next week where we talk about something new and different, or we'll unpack more of this same topic, because I know you talked about wanting to do a part 2. So
Well,
maybe we'll hit that next week.
Next week will be not about the physical act of writing. It will be issues with written expression, which is a type of learning difference that can cause a lot of issues.
Okay. Thank you so much, Heather. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Y'all have a great week.